From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Vice President Kamala Harris hits the campaign trail in New Hampshire, unveiling a new plan for small business.
My vision of an opportunity economy is one where everyone can compete and have a real chance to succeed.
We'll take a closer look at her proposal to expand tax incentives as the campaign unveils more of its long-awaited economic agenda.
Plus, we'll do a deeper dive into how both candidates are approaching business as President Biden prepares to block Nippon Steel's proposed acquisition of U.S. Steel. We'll be joined by Christopher Smart of Arbroath Group about what each potential administration would mean for growth and investors.
And later this hour, the biggest shakeup in the Ukrainian government since the start of the war. The country's top general and foreign minister leave the cabinet. Jane Harman of the Commission on the National Defense Strategy will be here with more on the next phase in the fight against Russia.
But we begin this evening with Vice President Kamala Harris in New Hampshire, as we said, unveiling a new proposal today aimed at helping small businesses, specifically expanding the small business tax credit, which currently stands at $5,000. Now it would provide a $50,000 tax deduction for startup costs, again, 10 times the current level. Harris told a crowd in New Hampshire today that the policy would spur more small business applications under her potential administration.
One of my highest priorities will be to strengthen America's small businesses. We're going to help more small businesses and innovators get off the ground, okay? Now, I'm setting what some, I'm sure, are going to call a very ambitious goal. I want to see 25 million new small business applications by the end of my first term.
For more on this proposal, we bring in Bloomberg's Mike Dorning with us here at the table in Washington. He helps lead our congressional coverage and a longtime hand in politics here in Washington as a journalist. Good to see you, Mike. Welcome back. Who's the audience for this as the Democrat tries to embrace business, but more specifically small business today?
Well, it's something that you would show the business community, but it's consistent with the kind of populist, progressive image they want to show. Mm-hmm. This is smaller businesses. And so it's part of the competition agenda if you create more smaller businesses to compete with big businesses. At the same time, startups play well with the tech sector, as Harris well knows, coming from California. And there are a lot more small businesses now. There were 19 million new small businesses under Biden, a record. So this is a growing part of the economy.
Well, of course, if we're going to reduce the number of taxes or the amount of taxes small businesses will need to pay, in addition to some of the other things Harris is proposing, the question becomes, how do you pay for that? Something Biden wanted to do to pay for it was raise the capital gains tax rate for those earning more than $1 million to 39.6%. Harris said today, I want 28%. So she lowered the increase that's being looked for. Does that mean she has to raise taxes somewhere else to fund this? How is this math going to work?
Well, they haven't given us any tally of how they're going to pay for all these things, although she has, for prior proposals, dipped into about $3 trillion worth of proposals that the Biden administration previously put out. This is something that will scale back the capital gains, so it makes her appear more friendly to business in general, and it's probably somewhat realistic it's going to get scaled back in Congress anyway.
Yeah, there's a big difference between 39% and 28%. Have we finally found sunlight between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden on a major issue?
We have, but Biden proposed that multiple times, even with the Democratic Congress. He was never able to get it. Yeah. So it's maybe trying to get some political points, but you're not really giving anything up, because even if she was elected, the Biden plan didn't pass with a Democratic majority in Congress. So maybe she's starting giving away something in the negotiations to look better in the election.
Of course, as we consider Harris's tax policy, it is worth pointing out, and Mike, you were the editor on this story, we have a piece out today that looks at the tax cuts Donald Trump is proposing, could tally $10.5 trillion over a decade. That is more than every dollar of non-defense discretionary spending. So there's very big pay-for questions on his side as well. Something both of these campaigns seem to agree with, though, is that they would like to see U.S. steel stay in American hands. Talking about another economic issue here, specifically unions and steel workers. We learned today, based off Bloomberg's reporting, that Joe Biden is going to block that deal. How should we consider how that is factoring into this election cycle, not just potentially taking away an issue from Harris and Trump, but also senators in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania who are in tough races?
It shows less about this election cycle than a turn in American views about economics that have taken place over the last 8 years since Trump was elected, which Biden and Harris also are joining. A turn away from the neoliberal worldview under Clinton and George W. Bush to a Trump-Harris-Biden view of being a little bit more protectionist, a little bit more economically nationalist, and being very much against having key U.S. industries fade away to foreign competition. It's a big populist message. They're both going after the working class in key states.
Yeah, we certainly are seeing a pattern establishing here when it comes to populism. Bloomberg's Mike Dorning, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And we want to take a closer look at the politics behind these plans. We're joined now by Bloomberg Opinion's Nia-Malika Henderson. So, Nia, as Mike is talking to us about kind of the populist undertones of a lot of this, it does raise the question, they're going after the same batch of voters. Is this really about earning votes that they don't already have? Or are both of these plans catering to the bases where they already can count on votes being cast?
Well, listen, they're trying to do both, right? Sort of double down on their base, but also cross over to some voters that they might not be popular with yet. Working class voters, if you are Kamala Harris, you got to think about those working class voters in places like Pennsylvania, in places like Wisconsin, and Michigan. And if you're Donald Trump, he isn't doing as well as he wants to do among suburban voters, among college-educated voters as well. And so that is the play you see. I think if you're Kamala Harris, part of this is also there are criticisms around whether or not she has, beefed up her policy. Does she have enough policy proposals, and are those sort of explicit and detailed enough? So that's part of what she's answering here, too. And if you look at polls, voters by and large trust Donald Trump by maybe 10 or more points on the economy over Kamala Harris. So that's part of it as well. Typically you have the Republican Party as the party of business, right? And you've got in Donald Trump, somebody who is calling Kamala Harris Comrade Kamala, right? That she is from the far left of her party. So here she is talking about economics, talking about sort of bread and butter economic issues in a way that I think deflects from these criticisms and around that she's too far to the left and kind of captured by the progressive wing of her party.
To pick up on Kaylee's question about undecided voters here, we had a really interesting conversation today, spirited conversation as always, with New Hampshire's Governor Chris Sununu, who's endorsed the Trump campaign, of course, having earlier supported Nikki Haley. He talked to us on the early edition of Balance of Power about these economic policies from the Harris campaign. He claims her plans will not resonate with undecideds. Here's what he said.
That financial stress, that anxiety, if you will, that stuff that keeps them up at night, that's what drives a voter. And that 10 to 12% of swing voters that are still out there, that's far and away the number one issue. Not so much on the macroeconomic scale, I get nervous about that, but day to day, family to family, it's all about how we're going to pay our bills and who's the agent of change, clearly not the current administration.
I want to pick up on that idea because we can balance these two economic proposals against each other. Everyone seems to have a take. They both result in trillions of dollars in deficit spending. But what about this idea of being an agent of change when you've been in the House for 3.5 years?
Yeah, listen, I think her being the agent of change is about her identity, quite frankly, right? She is saying, do Americans want to get past the era of old men, right? And embrace someone who...
Even as she's working for.
Yeah, even as she's working for an older gentleman. So I think that is part of the implicit argument that she's making. You can see, polls suggest that they are sort of buying into that. They don't necessarily tie her so closely to the Biden administration or Biden. And you can see that in the polls, right? Voters that Biden wasn't doing well with, younger voters, African-American voters, Latino voters, women voters, she is doing off-the-chart numbers in a way that you didn't see from Biden. And partly, I think some of the data suggests that people sort of liked Biden's policies by and large, but it was Biden they didn't like. It was him that they thought just couldn't carry the load for another 4 years because of his age. And she, I think, because she's younger, because she's a woman of color, is a different messenger and can put a different spin on these policies.
It's great to have you back with us. Reporting, of course, and writing for Bloomberg Opinion. With us here today at the table, Nia-Malika, Henderson. Great conversation, as always. Coming up, high-stakes implications for the U.S. economy as we take a closer look at both candidates' tax proposals. The details ahead with Christopher Smart, managing partner at the Arbroath Group. It's next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
The tax deduction for startups to $50,000. We will provide low and no interest loans to small businesses that want to expand, and we will, and this is very important, cut the red tape that can make starting and growing a small business more difficult than it needs to be.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris earlier today detailing her new plan to increase tax deductions for small businesses. For more on the actual economics of this proposed policy, we're joined now on Bloomberg TV and radio by Christopher Smart, managing partner at the Arbroath Group. Thank you so much, Christopher, for being back with us on Balance of Power. At the same time that she's calling for this greater tax deduction for companies of a certain size, businesses of a certain size, she also is calling for a 28% capital gains tax rate. Yes, that is up from the 20% for a million, those earning $1 million plus as it stands now, but it's lower than the 39.6% rate that Joe Biden proposed to pay for a lot of the ideas he would like to pursue. Is the mathing here with the policies that Kamala Harris is proposing and the way in which she would like to pay for them, or are they going to be deficit additive either way?
Well, I'm only smiling when you start asking about the math. I'm not sure anybody really has gone through with a sharp pencil and added all these things up and see where it really does come down in terms of the deficit and our debt costs over the next several years. This is, I think, clearly a political move by Vice President Harris to lock in those last remaining, 25, 35 undecided voters across the country and avoid being painted as a far left state planner, I think, as President Trump is trying to do. These are, I think, proposals she'll be able to go into a debate with next week and say, no, this is a much more reasonable way of being responsible about raising new revenue, which we desperately need to do, but not put undue burden on businesses. And as you saw in that clip, a particular shout out to small businesses and startups in terms of trying to break through the red tape. That's obviously an evergreen promise by American politicians, but it is certainly something that needs attention.
Well, sticking with the math here, Christopher, I know you were told there'd be no math. We saw an analysis from Goldman Sachs looking at Donald Trump's proposals here. Even if Congress were to eliminate every dollar of non-defense discretionary spending, his proposals, projected to be $9.8 trillion over the next 10 years, would not offset the estimated expense of the tax cuts floated in recent weeks, making the Trump tax cuts permanent. You add that to tariffs, and it could speak to $10.5 trillion over a decade. Is this becoming a race between these two campaigns to see who can outspend the other?
Well, I think, we've learned over the last months and years that to be a deficit hawk is a very lonely place to be in Washington or anywhere else in the U.S. political spectrum. I think we have had a luxury over the last several decades of being able to expand our deficit, raise our debt, and not have our borrowing costs go up because the deficit is rising. Obviously, borrowing costs rose and now are falling again because of broader interest rates and inflation outlooks. But nobody seems to want to charge the U.S. government an extra premium because of its sort of loose approach to deficit spending and debt dynamics. So I think, again, this is much more about a political agenda on both sides. And I think you're right that more likely than not, our deficits are going to be bigger rather than smaller, and our debts are going to be continuing to mount. for the foreseeable future until such time as markets start holding us to account.
Well, on the subject of the way in which markets are watching this, looking for the potential inflationary impulses that could result from this policy, but growth as well. And that's not necessarily growth in the positive direction. If you pay attention to the research fresh out of Goldman Sachs yesterday that finds there could be a peak hit of 50 basis points in GDP in the second half of next year if Trump did indeed pursue some of the tariff policy that he's talking about. They go on to say that if Kamala Harris wins and Democrats secure both chambers of Congress, that could actually result in a boost to GDP growth because of expanded income tax credits and the like. The thing is, though, in that scenario, she does need Congress to go along with her for this to have any kind of economic impact, really. Right, Christopher? And Donald Trump could decide tariff policy on his own.
He can start to decide tariff policy on his own, but I guess to implement the scale and scope of tariffs that he wants to, he'll need some congressional action. But in any case, I think, the folks at Goldman are brave as ever to try and put numbers on these two different scenarios. I think they're absolutely right directionally that the combination of both Trump tariffs and Trump immigration controls, which may not wind up expelling 15 million undocumented immigrants, as he's been promising. Maybe you take 1 million or 2 people out of the workforce, but the combination of that plus tariffs is broadly inflationary and negative to growth. I think, if you look at a Harris scenario where she is going to, as we discussed earlier, maybe spend a little bit more, maybe tax a little bit more on the margins, but not those restrictions on the labor force, you could probably see some greater growth there. And yes, she does depend on Congress, to get back to your question, to approve a lot of what she wants to put into place. But Congress, as you know, is much more favorable, even a Republican Congress, at increasing spending than it is at any sort of spending cuts.
Well, interesting to be talking about capital gains taxes here, along with corporate taxes. When it comes to the Harris campaign, looking for some sunlight potentially between her approach and Joe Biden's approach. What's going to happen, Christopher, with regard to so-called unrealized gains? Capital gains taxes against unrealized gains. Wall Street apparently considering this its worst nightmare. It's a big reason why the markets tend to favor the idea, dare I say, of a Trump 2.0. Unless, of course, she takes this off the table. Do you know where the campaign goes on this issue?
I think it's hard to know. I mean, again, she is a fairly new candidate, as we all know. She has been a part of this administration, but she's beginning to try and create some distance between herself and President Biden right now. And then again, to Kayleigh's point earlier, all of this is going to depend on what kind of a Congress she's going to be negotiating with. And as we've seen before, these are very messy negotiations, and things like unrealized, the particular rate applied to unrealized gains get negotiated and bargained late through the night, and I think it's very hard at this stage to know how that could possibly come out. But I think the direction is, lower tax increases from the Harris campaign than a Biden campaign would have promised, and I think that is taking her back towards more of a centrist position. Again, maybe taking an eye on the kinds of voters she needs to win over between now and the election day.
Yeah. It's great to have you back. Christopher Smart, managing partner at Arbroath Group. We thank you, Christopher, for being back with us today on Bloomberg. Coming up, shares of U.S. steel fall hard as Bloomberg reports President Biden is preparing to block a proposed takeover by Japan-based Nippon Steel. The latest on the opposition, what it could mean for American jobs, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The president has been very consistent on this. He believes that American steel companies ought to be American-owned, there's a CFIUS process that needs to occur. This is the kind of potential transaction that we believe is suitable for a CFIUS review, and I really can't go beyond that.
White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby earlier in the briefing room speaking about Nippon Steel's proposed acquisition of U.S. Steel, currently under review by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. Bloomberg News reporting President Biden now is preparing to block the takeover formally as we await findings from that CFIUS report. Shares of U.S. Steel, as you can see, fell hard today, down some 24% at one point in New York, trading on this news. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Simon Casey, following the story. He's the managing editor for energy and commodities in the Americas. Simon, thank you for joining. It's great to have you. Is this deal as good as dead?
Pretty much. I mean, at this point, I think we're just waiting for the official announcement from Washington. And as I'm sure you've seen, on Monday, Kamala Harris came out and said publicly for the first time addressing the situation. She was right in line with what Biden has been saying this year. She said this deal, quote, should be stopped. Trump has opposed it. J.D. Vance has been opposing it. The unions from the get-go were opposing it. So this seems like the final nail in the coffin.
Well, of course, this also comes the day we learned from U.S. Steel that they say if this deal doesn't go through, it's going to imperil thousands of jobs and potentially its headquarters in Pittsburgh. What will the actual consequence be of blocking this?
Well, job losses are possible. Look, I mean, U.S. Steel, unfortunately, has been a story of gradual decline over the last several decades. It's now something like the 24th largest producer in the world. Nippon Steel is the 4th largest producer. It's a relative minnow. It's struggled to be competitive on the global stage, and it has these legacy plants, these blast furnaces that use iron ore, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, that are just not competitive, and they need a huge amount of investment to change that situation. Nippon Steel promised that. Without Nippon Steel, the future for those plants in the long term looks pretty bleak.
Is there an American buyer? Does Cleveland Cliffs get back into the picture here to save these jobs?
I think that's possible. I mean, never say never. I think that at one stage they'd sort of ruled themselves out. They'd had a punt this year that really hadn't sort of come together. The U.S. Steel simply did not want to engage. The management there wanted to stick with Nippon Steel. But if this deal, as it appears to have run its course at this point, maybe the door opens again to Cleveland Cliffs. So let's see.
All right, Bloomberg's Simon Casey reporting on this from New York this evening. Thank you so much. Certainly a story we're going to be paying a lot of attention to. Of course, we'll await the actual results of that CFIUS review and see what President Biden does from there.
The stock reaction was incredible.
Yeah.
It really, clearly, people were not taking all of these threats very seriously. But now when the president moves formally, it's just a different story.
Yeah, especially when you consider the 17% drop at the end of the day today was in addition to the 6% drop in the stock yesterday.
Brutal.
Brutal indeed. Well, we still have much more coming up here on Balance of Power, including Ukraine's government seeing a major reshuffling. We'll have more on that with Jane Harman next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Ukraine does not steal any money from American taxpayers. It's, to say the least, a very little part of the overall defense spendings. Moreover, a vast amount of this money stays in the United States because it's invested in the production of weapons that goes then to Ukraine.
That was now former Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba on Bloomberg television earlier this year. He just became the 6th cabinet member to resign in the last 2 days in what's being called the largest shakeup of the Ukrainian government since the war started. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington alongside Kayleigh Lyons. And Kayleigh, this is a remarkable development here, one that follows this cross-border incursion that Ukraine has successfully had underway for some time now, for weeks in Russia, in the Kursk region. A lot of questions about the motivation here and the extent to which they're keeping the enemy guessing.
Yeah, of course, Zelensky has said he expects there to be different emphasis when it comes to both foreign policy and domestic policy. Hasn't elaborated more than that as to what exactly the shakeup is going to entail, what kind of broader strategy shift on the part of Ukraine and its fight against Russia could come along with it. But as you note, it obviously comes as Ukraine is actually moving offensively, not just defensively against Russia, although it is still getting hit, as we saw yesterday, one of the deadliest missile strikes Russia has conducted since this war began in February of last year that killed more than 50 people, which is why Zelensky is renewing his calls for air defense. But it may be now different people who are pleading to the U.S. and other countries for that air defense.
Yeah, and I don't know that a new voice is going to help that argument here in Washington, but you're right. This back and forth has been remarkable, and Vladimir Putin is again threatening to target the company's energy infrastructure in the throes of winter. Using the cold as a weapon, Kaylee, is something we've seen 2 seasons in a row now, and it looks like we will maybe go through this all over again. Reporting interesting today in Axios that the Ukrainians have developed their own sort of hybrid missile drone that they are using in cross-border action, which allows them to do whatever they want because it's not made by the United States, and they are therefore not bound to the restrictions that we put in place.
Yeah, it's certainly a fascinating area to watch. And of course, this is just one theater in which there is active conflict that we're paying attention to. We still have eyes on the Middle East as efforts toward a ceasefire agreement are still at least being pursued by the U.S., that the Netanyahu government, specifically the prime minister himself, doesn't necessarily seem to be becoming any more liberal in his thinking around a potential ceasefire in the aftermath of the death of 6 hostages that were being held by Hamas that, of course, were executed over the weekend.
That's true. We're going to keep tabs on these 2 parallel stories here with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump today, focused on the economy. It's really been domestic issues driving the campaign conversation here, the narrative on the campaign trail coming out of both campaigns, as we are reminded that however important these issues are, and we saw a real impact from the Israeli story on progressive Democrats, for instance, that most voters do not make their decisions based on foreign policy. I feel like Israel could be an exception for some, but when we talk about the economy and the border, Kaylee, it's just a much more complicated conversation.
Yeah, of course it is. There's a lot of complicated conversations happening in politics right now, I think it's fair to say, as we have what has been a very complicated election cycle, certainly. So let's discuss it more now. Joining us here around the table in Washington, Matt Gorman, Executive Vice President at Targeted Victory and Republican strategist, alongside our Democratic strategist today, Caitlin Legacki. Great to have both of you here as we consider foreign policy and domestic policy at once. It doesn't seem that the candidates can even really separate these conversations. But it was economic policy that Harris certainly was focused on today, talking about, Caitlin, tax relief for small businesses and raising the capital gains tax to help pay for it, but not as much as Joe Biden wanted. Is this where it happens, the distinction where she says, I am not the president I've been serving with for the last 3.5 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not a total departure, but I think she does recognize that there are a number of people in the business community who have had issues with the Biden administration, and she's clearly trying to seek more of a middle ground and a more moderate approach to economic policy. Clearly, her overarching message is that she wants to create a fairer system. She wants the wealthiest and large corporations to pay their fair share, but she doesn't want to be punitive. And so I think it's a fine line that she's walking, but I absolutely think it's the right one.
What do you think about this, Matt, as you look at this from the other side of the aisle?
You got to do a little more than just capital gains tax. Separate yourself from the president who selected you as vice president. But look, I think the key is what you're seeing, the tightening around these states from, say, a month ago when she took over the ticket, is she needs to tighten on the economy, right? Trump, she was winning on the economy when she first took over, late July, early August. There was probably a little bit of a bump. But right now she's losing by 8, where Biden was losing by, say, 12, if not more. She needs to narrow that a little bit more. But that essentially she needs to keep doing that if she wants to stay competitive in these states.
Well, as we consider the states in which she's competitive, we've seen new polling out of CNN, for example, looking at 6 swing states. They're not even including North Carolina in this, although the game arguably has changed there. But we do see Harris up in Michigan, up in Georgia, in Nevada. This is a wider map, and she was in New Hampshire today as she tries to make sure she solidifies that state. We asked this of New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu earlier on today. Is New Hampshire a place where Donald Trump should be focusing spending money and energy right now if he has to defend other battlegrounds?
I would wait until September 11th, the day of the debate, and see where things stand, especially after the debate, right? If Joe Biden is still a nominee, New Hampshire would likely have flipped, right? It's a heavily white state. It's also in the Boston media market, so it's quite expensive. But it's also, I think, she's stirring it up, number one. But she's also has access to New York and Boston very easily, fundraising hubs. So I think that was probably a little bit more behind the visit today. But it's certainly something to keep an eye on, say, if Trump has a good night on the 10th.
Sure. It would have flipped to Biden, is your point in this case? Yeah. What do you make of this conversation and the idea of directing dollars where you might be able to lure the other campaign to spend needlessly? Is that what New Hampshire is becoming?
No, I think New Hampshire is generally a little bit less Democratic than people assume. Jeanne Shaheen only won in, 2014 by half a point. And she's the iconic New Hampshire Democrat. But to Matt's point, it's not just the Boston media market. If you go to New Hampshire, you're appealing to a state that is politically very important, but you're also going to get Boston media, you're going to get Vermont, you're going to get Maine. There is, in Maine, an electoral college split, so there's some value in that. You really hit 4 states for the price of 1. But I would not expect to see Kamala Harris and Tim Walz spending a whole lot more time in New Hampshire between now and Election Day.
Well, I want to go back to your comment about the debate on September 10th. We understand as of this evening, we still had a question as to whether or not the Harris campaign was going to agree to the rules around the mics. But they have, in fact, agreed to what ABC laid out. They will be muted when it is not the candidate's turn to speak. Net advantage, Donald Trump?
I think it's a net advantage for both parties. The key when you go into these debates and you prep for them, most of all, you want certainty. You want to know exactly what your prep will mimic what will be on the stage. Any other variables, it hurts the prep and it makes the candidates a little bit uncomfortable. So both candidates now, over this next week or so, a little bit less, can go into prep knowing exactly what they can expect, plan for themselves, but also as they prep for what the other person will say and how they'll rebut any argument.
It's interesting because there was a sense that the Harris campaign didn't want the muted mics. They were arguing with this. Caitlin, what's your thought here? Is that advantage Trump? Because she wanted to be able to tell him to stop talking over her.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that they obviously made it known that they wanted Trump to be vocal the entire time. It both, reflects poorly on him and his inability to let someone else speak. But then, the counterpoint is her viral moment from the campaign and the debate with Mike Pence was her asking him to let her speak. I think, the Harris campaign was also envisioning a scenario in which she would be able to, interrogate him directly and press him directly in a way that she's now no longer going to be able to. But I still think, that's going to be a minor storyline of this debate. It's really going to be focused on the substance. And, by the 11th, we'll have all forgotten about the muted mics.
Well, we do understand Kamala Harris will be, I guess, prepping for not having the muted mics in Pittsburgh. She, of course, travels there tomorrow and will be staying there until she goes to Philadelphia on Tuesday. All right, our political panel will be back with us. But first, we also have to talk about foreign policy and Ukraine's government seeing a major reshuffling. This as Russia unleashes new strikes against the country. We'll talk the next phase of the war with Jane Harman, chair of the Commission of the National Defense Strategy, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. With our focus abroad now, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to tap a senior diplomat and former ambassador to Turkey to become foreign minister as part of the biggest cabinet reshuffle since the start of the invasion. For more, we're joined now, as promised, by Jane Harman, the chair of the Commission on the National Defense Strategy. Jane, it's great to see you here. This is a remarkable moment. As Dmytro Kuleba, who is no stranger to Bloomberg TV, he's been on this program before. Last time he spoke to us, I believe, on Bloomberg was back in January, framed as a loyal lieutenant here to Volodymyr Zelensky. Is Ukraine in better hands without him?
Well, I think the stability of the Zelensky government, Zelensky himself and his cabinet members, has been a big plus in selling continued support for Ukraine, both to the United States and to Europe. So this is a surprising move to me. I would just comment that my Commission on National Defense Strategy visited Ukraine in April at the invitation of the Minister of Strategic Industry, who's one of these people who has just resigned. And he was very capable, and what we saw there was drone manufacturing, tank manufacturing, and some other manufacturing in Ukraine, a robust industrial base that we actually can't replicate in the United States. So I'm not sure what the next moves are. I don't know who this Turkish ambassador is. I hope Zelensky will explain himself, because I think international support does depend on viewing his government as stable.
Well, and of course, international support does come at a cost, especially to the point you were just making, Jane, as to there's only so much capacity, industrial capacity, when it comes to a lot of this actual defense equipment. Knowing that in the aftermath of the deadly strike Russia conducted yesterday that killed more than 50 Ukrainians, injured hundreds more, they've called again for more air defense, things like Patriot missile systems and the like. Is there actually enough of that to go around?
Well, there needs to be more in Ukraine. Let's understand, I think this was said earlier on your program, that a majority of the appropriations for Ukraine go to the U.S. industrial base, which is producing the equipment. So these are investments at home, and that's good for the U.S. economy. You were just talking about why the U.S. economy polls higher, but this is a contribution to the U.S. economy. But there needs to be more equipment, more lethal equipment, and faster. I think we were way too cautious in sending long-range fires and in permitting Ukraine to hit targets in Russia. Let's understand those targets are where the attacks to Ukraine are coming from. Why shouldn't Ukraine be able to defend itself? I'm on that side. Many of us are and have been for months and months and months. And I hope that we will now give more robust permission and do our best to help Ukraine win, which is the goal here. Win meaning find a way to push Russia back, prevent Russian aggression into Europe, which will come if Ukraine loses.
Well, Jane, we have to hear from you on what's happening right now in the Middle East, and specifically Israel, where Benjamin Netanyahu did speak today. We'll talk about that in a moment. Earlier on Bloomberg Surveillance, we heard from Ron Dermer, the strategic affairs manager of Israel, said this about the likelihood of a ceasefire deal following the deaths of the 6 hostages last weekend in Gaza.
In the wake of the horrific execution of 6 hostages, including an American, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, Israel is not going to make concessions in the wake of that. We are committed to a deal. We set people to sit with negotiators to try to get that deal done. And I hope we can do it. We're working with the U.S. administration to try to push that deal forward. Until we have an actual practical solution on the ground for the Philadelphia corridor, Israel forces cannot leave.
Jane, Benjamin Netanyahu adds today Israel must stay at the Egypt-Gaza border in a first phase of any ceasefire. He's talking about the Philadelphia corridor. Without that withdrawal, is a ceasefire impossible?
I think the Philadelphia corridor is a new condition to a deal that I think is a very good deal. Kamala Harris strongly supports it. The Biden administration strongly supports it. Most of the world strongly supports it. And I think it's an Israel security issue to agree to the deal. I do understand that there are some issues along the border, but I don't think they're going to be solved by adding new conditions. I think they're going to be solved by implementing the deal and getting buy-in from the neighborhood, from many countries in the world, and from many citizens of Israel into a situation where there won't be more killing of hostages, and the hostages will be returned. What happened the last few days was horrific. I do agree with Ron Dermer about that. Was it avoidable if we had an earlier deal? I would want to think that, and I feel just as bad as he does about Hirsch, Poland, Goldberg.
Well, Jane, as you raise Israeli citizens themselves, of course, thousands we have seen take to the streets in the aftermath of the death of Hirsch and the others this weekend. Is it the domestic pressure on Netanyahu growing that actually could make the most difference of all, not the leverage trying to be exercised by the U.S. or Egypt or Qatar?
Well, I think they both matter. I think there is 250,000 people in the streets in one protest and continuing over days is a big deal. Benny Gantz saying that the Philadelphia corridor condition is not necessary is a big deal. And I think the internal pressure will grow. It is not my place or the U.S. government's place to talk about any change in government, but it is our place to criticize things Israel is doing that harm Israel's security. And I think by not taking the deal as originally constructed and agreed to by Israel, it's a big mistake by the Israeli government.
Jane, thank you, as always. Jane Harman, great to have you back. She's chair of the Commission on the National Defense Strategy, of course, former Democratic Congresswoman. Great to have you with us on Balance of Power. We'll have a lot more ahead. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
And it's just outrageous that every day in our country, in the United States of America, that parents have to send their children to school worried about whether or not their child will come home alive. But our kids are sitting in a classroom where they should be fulfilling their God-given potential, and some part of their big, beautiful brain is concerned about a shooter busting through the door of the classroom. It does not have to be this way.
That's Vice President Kamala Harris talking this afternoon following the deadly school shooting. Yeah, there's been another. This one in Winder, Georgia. It happened earlier today. 2 students, 2 teachers. We reassembled our panel. Matt Gorman, Executive Vice President of Targeted Victory, is with us, a Republican strategist, along with Democratic strategist Caitlin Legacki. This is the tough stuff, one of the tough issues that we end up talking about a lot around here. So we have another one. And what is it? Wednesday. By Monday, I suspect, after calls for an assault rifle ban and more gun controls, maybe a red flag law that works, we'll move on to the next one. We've moved on from an attempted assassination of a former president, and nothing's going to change today, is it?
No. I mean, Monday might even be optimistic. It'll likely, I think, probably by the end of the week. What I would expect, though, is this will probably come up as a question in the debate. We talk about the debate. I would expect this is now wrapped in a question that they're going to play with in debate prep and practice. Mm-hmm. The moderators will certainly ask about it. It'll give certainly Kamala Harris a chance to talk about what she just talked about, but also fairly Trump can say, "Look, I've been shot," and so it's a unique answer for both of them. I would expect that to be one of the consequences of this on Tuesday night. Wow.
But Donald Trump has pulled himself to the middle on other issues like abortion, for example, and IVF, reproductive rights as a whole. Why not do the same on the issue of gun violence? Tim Walz, for example, is a gun owner. He's a hunter. He still advocates for red flag laws and background checks. Is that not something the Republican Party could adopt as a whole?
We saw this in 2022. After the shooting there, I believe it was Uvalde, there was a little bit of a precipice where you could start seeing some sort of electoral consequence for folks in the middle to not do something, right? And you saw there was I'm blinking on the exact law, but it was a bipartisan law. I believe Cornyn did it along with Chris Murphy. That is where you kind of will see some movement. Abortion, there's been clearly electoral consequences on that. Nobody knows polls better than Trump. For it to get legislative action, that's the key.
Well, it's interesting. So I think we've established with Matt that this is a talker. This is something that will energize people. We'll talk about it. It might come up during the debate, but there will not likely be a legislative answer. Is that true, and how is she handling it?
Yeah, I mean, it's especially true if Democrats lose control of the Senate. If we lose control of the Senate, there's no gun legislation going anywhere. And so I think what it does is it can help her reinforce the need for Democrats to turn out both at the top of the ticket, but also to hold the Senate and flip the House. Now, this is a coin toss election. It's going to be close in all 3 bodies, the presidency, the Senate, and the House. But I think it really shows that it matters who you vote for up and down the ticket. She obviously transferred $25 million earlier this week to help down ballot races. And it's these kinds of issues where she can make an argument that says, if you support my agenda, this is what we have to do to get it done.
Just finally, Caitlin, because you brought up that money that she's sending to others, is it too early and too great a sum? Does that express a certain degree of overconfidence on the part of the Harris campaign?
No, I mean, ballots are being printed in North Carolina. I think the earliest voting starts in less than 2 weeks in certain states. And so what it does do is it goes and it gives these committees like the DSCC and the DCCC a chance to give a last-minute surge of money into these swing districts, and I think it's very smart. If she were to wait until October or even late September, it would probably be too late, frankly.
We only have a minute left, Matt, so I always love to sneak up on you when we're out of time.
It's fine.
Early voting starts.
Oh, yeah.
Friday.
Mm-hmm.
How much damage has Donald Trump doing talking about the negative side of mail-in ballots?
I mean, I'm glad he's at least changed his position on it in the last, say, 6 months. Because you're right. It was absolutely something that's necessary. Both parties really rely on early voting and mail-in voting. So having someone out there who's now on board with it was huge. Yeah.
All right. Matt Gorman, Caitlin Legacki, our political panel today. Great to see you. As always, thank you both so much for joining us. And, of course, you can get more coverage in the Washington Edition newsletter on the Terminal online. Of course, the subject matter we'll be discussing tomorrow, Harris in Pittsburgh and Donald Trump speaking at the Economic Club of New York.
We'll have more on that as we follow both campaigns' economic plans. And, of course, the debate prep begins Tuesday night. We'll be talking a lot more about it. Thanks to our guests and our great panel for talking about some serious issues with grace, and for you joining us on Balance of Power. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.